It's that time of year for the inaugural 2024 Seattle Seahawks Season Awards. Our chance to look at those players that were a cut above on the football field, to look at those guys that stood out, along with a few low lights sprinkled in, because we've got to take notice of everything. And it's going to start right off the rip without wasting any time here with the Comeback Player of the Year award. This is an award that's sometimes given out at the NFL level to players who aren't really coming back from anything. They've not really done much of anything. It's more of a, hey, you were a prospect and you didn't do nothing, and now you've suddenly done something, so good. Or a guy who just happened to come back from something who wasn't good, who now just came back, which is all good, but it really should be about a guy that showed you a flash, maybe went away, and now is coming back and showing you that flash once again. And the guy for me on that is Charles Cross. The kid that they took in the top 10 the first round a couple of years ago came out in his rookie season and provided a ton of promise. Then he came back last year and had a toe injury in the very first game of the season, very early in that game, and you got to feel like he was still struggling through it even when he got back onto the football field halfway into the year. Never quite his best self, on top of being a younger prospect coming out who was going to take a little bit of time to develop. But develop he has into a very well-rounded player. He was a top 10 rated tackle by PFF this past year. He's just below the likes of Lane Johnson and Trent Williams as far as his ranking goes. So while he's not a star, and while many will point to things like his overall pressures given up, which is a noteworthy stat and not to just be tossed away, but it also is within context when you think about the fact that the Hawks were one of the league leaders in passing attempts. More passing attempts, a guy starts the majority, if not almost all the games, you're probably going to end up with a little bit of more higher total pressures. Better to look at maybe more of the pressure rate at that point. And he's good along those lines. Also a really good run blocker who's come along in that way since he came along in that first season. But you got to feel more of what you were going to get to play with him when he came in here, which was not that you were going to get a guy with an upside of a Walter Jones, but a guy that could give you a Laramie Tunsil kind of upside. Right there below the level of stardom, that's just where he's fitted to, and he's turned into a really good player on a line that's got a lot of shakiness. The honorable mention here is going to be to Kobe Bryant, who in his first year had that peanut Tillman punch from the slot, knocked out a lot of balls, caused a lot of fumbles, had 2 interceptions called back due to penalties in that rookie year, or he would just be a turnover machine. He's had to wait a little bit of time. He's had to bounce between different positions to finally land at the safety position, but he's taken hold of it. He's made the most of it. And what you got to see from Kobe Bryant was a well-rounded season. How he covered, how he tackled, being assignment correct, still bringing that playmaking ability to take away the ball in a variety of ways. Got a couple of interceptions, had a couple more just near misses, or he could have easily had 5, 6 interceptions on the year. The future looks very bright for him at the safety position, as it looks like he is going to be your de facto starter moving into next year. Our next award is Offensive Player of the Year, and this is a 2-horse race that comes down to a wide receiver and a quarterback. And I've got to give the quarterback the nod, as he had a little bit higher degree of difficulty than the slot receiver, who has a little bit of an easier pathway to getting open and getting catches than, let's say, even the outside wide receivers. And Geno Smith this year is my Offensive Player of the Year. He was under duress almost constantly, almost every single game, and yet he reset 3 different passing records for your Seattle Seahawks, resetting his own passing records, including a 70% completion percentage. Was it perfect? No. Was there some problems that started to bear out from the fact that he's been under this much pressure, not just this year, but by and large over the past 3 years? It's been a lot like this, and there's a cumulative over time where you start to get some shaky performance from a quarterback, especially when it comes to turnovers, when they're faced with that much duress, as Geno has been over this time period. But he stood tall in the pocket. He's been poised. He even used his legs a couple times this year, including getting the win against the San Francisco 49ers for the game on the game-winning drive. And oh, by the way, 9 fourth-quarter comeback from behind wins in the last 2 years. The man is clutch when it counts. He'll play out there beaten up. He's had the past couple of years where his season has finished up in that way. Yet he is a warrior, yet he does walk out in that field and gives it his all every single time. As I said, it's not perfect, but you can't help but wonder with this guy what will happen if you could ever get him an actual competent offensive line that wasn't just a leaky ship that couldn't leave the bay every week almost. The guy that's the honorable mention here is Jackson Smith-Njigba. The route ninja came into this season with a lot of hope that he could finally take a step forward out from under Waldron, who looked kind of restrictive to him last year, that Grubb would really be able to let him go. And we had to wait about 6-7 weeks for it to really happen. It looked like a little bit of more of the same. And yet once it clicked in, once it locked in, and this is the way it is for young players, especially young players coming out, where Jackson was a lot like Charles Cross in his age coming out, very young, so you got to give him a little bit more extra time for those guys, but the ceiling will often be there. The reward will be there for having that patience, and Jackson rewarded you for that patience. The second that he had his first breakout game where it all came together and really on the back of a drop pass that was intercepted, and from in there on, the flip switched, he was ready to go, and every single game he was capable down the home stretch. He was bringing you clutch catches. He was showing you some yak ability that we didn't get a chance to see as much of last year, or really all that much at college, to be frank. So the game continues to grow. He shows you he can stretch the field from the slot and do it all from that position. He can score touchdowns in addition to that. He looks like a top 3 slot wide receiver moving into next year with his 1,100-yard year this year, and a good building block for this receiving core as we go forward, especially with now as it does look like Tyler Lockett is probably going to retire or move on. Well, if I'm going to have an offensive player of the year, then I got to have a defensive player of the year too. And this one's not going to be any shock to any of you out there. Leonard Williams, the big cat. 64 tackles, 11 sacks, 16 tackles for loss, 3 passes defensed, an interception, and a record-breaking touchdown return of 90 yards. That's the longest for a man over 300 pounds in NFL history. He was everywhere for your Seattle Seahawks this year, a game changer in every way. And he was a guy where you had a lot of tight games here at times where his play was a separating factor to help you go take those games and get the win. I really do believe that he should be in Defensive Player of the Year contention. I don't think he'll get it, as evidenced by the fact the man can't even get a Pro Bowl, but it doesn't mean he doesn't deserve it. Julian Love is my honorable mention, a guy that they signed to a contract extension just before the start of the season, an extension that's actually very good for both player and the team. It doesn't break their back like the Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams signing, yet the player does get some financial stability there, and he rewarded you for it with maybe one of his better years of his career. He led the team in tackles with 79, which is a rarity for safeties, though granted it is mainly because the Seahawks dumped both of their inside linebackers mid-season, but still notable. He also had 3 interceptions, and these picks were had by him jumping the route, making the play, not just an errant throw by the quarterback. He had a couple of forced fumbles as well, a couple of near-miss interceptions, which would have even made his year look even a little bit more better. He was a top 10 safety as rated by PFF. He looked good and all over the place, game in and game out, as he's a safety that you can use all over the place. He is a pure fit to this McDonald defense, a guy that was a cornerback in college, who's played free safety, who's played some strong safety. You can mix him all over the place, can even do a little bit of slot. That is the ideal here for Mike McDonald's defense, and a perfect fitting with Kobe Bryant just to the side of him, as both of those players have kind of a similar skill set in that way. But Julian Love rewarded the Seahawks for giving him that financial security, and he looks like a good player going forward in that secondary. How about Rookie of the Year? This was a good class for our Seattle Seahawks, as a lot of the youngsters were able to perform very well on the football field. Sato Alamea, AJ Barner in the 4th round provided you some really good value. But this is going to be given to the other 4th rounder, Tyrese Knight out of UTEP, who was having to wait most of the year to start, still ended out the season with 88 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. And another guy, stop me if you've heard me already mention this in the video a couple times over about a few of different of these players on both the offense and defensive side of the ball, but another player that gave you a well-rounded game throughout this year. He played well against the run. He played well against the pass, had a sack and a half if you asked him to blitz. He was a really strong blitzer for you out there, really notable in the difference of what you got from Ernest Jones to Tyrese Knight from what you had in Jerome Baker to Tyrell Dotson is the tackling ability. Not only can I get off the block, but I can be there and make the tackle, and he is not going to go any more forward. I will stop him where he stands. And Knight brings that, as does Ernest Jones, but notable because Knight is a rookie doing this, performing this well. Well graded as well by PF on top of looking really good to the eye test. A complete player from the will linebacker position who probably in a pinch can also give you good play from the Mike moving into the future. He's just a good overall player. Maybe not going to have star power moving into the future, but this is the solid type of player that you can add to your defense who's going to help you win football games. It's a little bit of shades of a KJ Wright, who's never looked at or viewed as a star. I could argue, and this is a whole nother deeper conversation to have, that will linebackers in these kind of defenses have a hard time being judged correctly by everybody, nationally, fans, and all of that, because it's hard to kind of measure their value because it's not as statistically driven. But he was well-rounded for you across the board. Whatever you asked him to do, he did it well. And he also brought just a little bit of thump in those pads. I do a segment on my show every week called The Hit of the Week, and Tyrese was a guy that showed up about 3 or 4 times laying some lumber, and he looks like a guy in the future who wouldn't surprise me if he depleted a few guys in his time. My honorable mention and the Good Soldier of the Year award goes to Byron Murphy. He was drafted in the 1st round by the Seahawks, looked at as a draft steal with all the offensive players taken ahead of him, and many Seahawks fans wanted to crown him with the Aaron Donald comparison, that he was going to be the 2.0 version. Unfortunately, he came to the Seattle Seahawks a victim to his own versatility. As he came out of Texas, you could see Texas loved to use him over there at the one tech because he could get it done. And over at the one tech, you have to take on two blockers by and large play after play. You have to do the dirty work of the defensive line. It's not a position that over the years of football and me watching it have I seen very many that have ever been able to statistically make much of any kind of impact from the nose tackle position. He got 36 sacks, got a half sack, had a couple tackles for loss, but it was really him stuck in that position of having to take on those double teams, doing that dirty work to help up free a guy like Leonard Williams, who was single blocked a lot of this year, given those opportunities to then flourish to have that career year-like season. It doesn't mean that Byron Murphy's a disappointment. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have some real high upside when he eventually can land over at that three-tech position away from the nose tackle role. He's just a victim to a little bit of that flexibility, but he's still a man with a lot of talent, a guy that can play all over that defensive line, but a guy that the Seahawks team and the coaching staff has to find better ways this offseason of finding more creative ways to get him involved other than just having him kind of wait in line behind the three-tech. As he's a guy that can do this job at the one-tech, do it well, but they'd be better served to go get a guy who can do one-tech stuff and then free Byron to be used all over the place. But it was still a good season for Murphy. Don't let anybody talk about anything in bust talk or there was a bad down year. He did a good job for you. He did what you asked. This is what a one-tech does for you, and he did it well. The next award is the player that I would least like to see ever again on the Seattle Seahawks team in the future. And this is one where he ran away with this award, did my guy here. I call him the Muff Man because he cannot catch the punt, and that would be D. Williams. The man that I begged week 1 for the Seattle Seahawks to release. You could see this train wreck a-coming. There were no tracks up ahead, and yet they held on hoping he could develop with time and get better and better and better. He did not. He was shaky as hell back there, muffed many a punts, and the second you got Jalen Darden back there, somewhere about 3/4 through the year after you had multitudes of fumbles there from D. Williams, it looks so much more certain and cleaner back there and better. Hopefully the team learns their mistake on this one rather than gambling on something so rough. Just take the certainty, take the guy that's not going to fumble the ball on those few punt returns that you have throughout the course of the game. Honorable mention goes to Laken Tomlinson. He's at the end of his career. We didn't pay him a lot of money. There's not a big amount of expectations. He didn't perform god-awfully, but it was certainly not good as well. And if you look at this offensive line giving up so many pressures across the board week in and week out, he was oftentimes one of the guys that was at the lead or near at the lead in the amount of pressures he was giving up. Still could run block pretty well, but when you got him to pass protection, it would get brutal. Just couldn't move much at the end of his career here, but he's played a lot of football. It's understandable. Honorable mention to Laviska Shenault, who was brought in on a 1-year, $1 million guaranteed contract to be your kick returner extraordinaire, but it was not very extraordinary. He was very pedestrian as a returner. He was also brought in to be a gadget guy on a team that had a lot of that need. Outside of Jackson Smith and Jigba, he was being really the only yak guy for you in this offense, and so there was really a role there to be fitted for him, especially once you moved on from Dwayne Eskridge in the preseason. And yet, he never got there, did Laviska, in that way. Only had 5 carries on the year, struggled to find any kind of role in an offense that at times sputtered and could have used any kind of playmaking, and I can only surmise that he just must have not practiced particularly well, as evidenced by the fact that they also released him right around the time that they released D. Williams. But neither Williams or Laviska Shenault, please come back to Seattle anytime soon. The player that found stardom this year, Jackson Smith and Jigba. I already talked a little bit about the route ninja earlier on, so I won't double down here, but he is a guy now that I do believe is fitted as a top 3 slot wide receiver moving on into the future, a guy that really had his production take a big step forward about mid-season, and you do wonder what happened if you had a whole year of that productivity, 14, 15, 1,600 yards. Still looks like he still has some more ceiling left to go, and he really is coming along as a player with the yak ability, with his ability to stretch from the slot, which is sometimes hard to do for those slot guys that are speed challenged. Not with him. He's able to get it done. Absolutely a route ninja. Absolutely a big part of this future. Honorable mention to Charles Cross, top 10 rated PFF left tackle in this sport. Missed me with the high pressures. That's more of a stat that speaks to how much they had to pass. That's more a stat that speaks to how little they were committed to running the football, which then made it much harder to pass protect. This is a guy moving into the future who's going to be a top 6 left tackle in this sport. A huge benefit to this team, and the first guy from that draft class a couple of years ago who's going to get a contract extension. The player who left me wanting more, DK Metcalf. Now, DK didn't have a bad year, 900 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns, and his year was severely impacted by the fact that it looked like he got injured pretty majorly about halfway into the year and wasn't quite ever the same then moving forward. And before he was injured, he was on pace to have the best year of his career. He was top 3 in the sport in receiving yardage. Now, some of this did come from the high volume of attempts the Seahawks were passing. It's a little bit like the good number on the high volume passing rate versus the bad number you get from a Charles Cross and pressures in that standpoint. And the team did seem to find a better way to utilize him early on in the season with more motion-based stuff, more of him within the slot. But then it did seem like the second the Jackson Smith emerged after DK's injury, that then DK kind of had to take a back seat at that point. Maybe it was the injury, maybe he was just a decoy working off a bum knee moving through the rest of the year. But we're still waiting at this point, 6 years into DK Metcalf's career, for him to get to that ceiling, for him to get to that high upside that we can all see that all seems to be at times tantalizingly close. Will he get there? We'll have to see. The Seahawks have a major decision to make on DK this offseason in regards to his contract. He's not going to play out the final year of his deal. And this was a good year overall still. He still is a really good blocker. There was that moment this year in the Falcons game where you got the run, I think it is, with Walker coming down the field, and all DK's got to do is put one single arm on the guy, and he's got him locked out and blocked up, and it's completely clean. It's just him showing off how much of a bully he is as a blocker and how good he is as a blocker. A very complete player in that way. But a big decision looming over the top of DK and what the Seahawks are going to choose to do. Still a good year ultimately. Maybe it was just the injury caused everything to kind of get derailed as far as those big plans go. But Jackson sitting in the slot now probably prevents them going forward of utilizing him as much in the slot, say nothing of how much you want to use him in motion at that point versus using Jackson in that role, as you can only have one guy in motion prior to the snap. So it's going to be interesting to see how they better use him, better get more out of DK moving into the future. Honorable mention goes to Derek Hall. And like Metcalf, it's not that he had a bad season per se. Quite the opposite, especially when you consider his first year, he gave you almost nothing as a player. He was bad as a run defender that year and 0 sacks. This year he comes back with 37 tackles, 8 sacks, and 6 tackles for loss. So that's a remarkable improvement. That's a huge leap forward. But there is still a lot more room for his game to grow, especially as a run defender. He was a guy coming out of Auburn with really heavy hands and an ability to set the edge. That's been missing from him as a player here in Seattle, where he oftentimes can get collapsed on the edge. And his awareness in space when the ball carriers around him is not the best. His tackling is not the best. You'd like to see that take a big leap forward if this guy is going to be one of those considered pillars off your edge going into the future, along with Boye Mafe. A lot of room to grow, a lot of reason to believe that growth will come with time, but he is still not a finished product. All right, we got to the portion of the award show you all been waiting for, the team MVP. And my MVP is going to be Geno Smith. I talked already a lot about what he's done here statistically this season, resetting some of his same old records, being under so much duress and having a job set out in front of him, which was made as tough as anybody on this team to get their job done. The receiver's got to get open. He needs the quarterback to still throw him the ball. He gets open, does his job, though. That's pretty straightforward. With Geno, he has to control the action at the line of scrimmage prior to the snap. How often is he up there needing to read things, needing to get into run checks, needing to get into pass checks, controlling the action like a general on the football field? And then how often did he have to then navigate poor pockets and getting around duress and still getting off a very good throw with velocity, with accuracy to the right spot? Was there a good collection of interceptions and turnovers overall this season that you'd like to see taken out of his game? Certainly. But those are also something that you're going to see with quarterbacks when you put them under that duress. This is what happens to quarterbacks with this kind of situation when over and over again, snap after snap, they're dealing with some kind of quick pressure. And the fact that he could still go out there and set franchise records despite being inundated with that pressure at that high level speaks to how good he was as a player, speaks to what he did as a player to help you carry you to games and get you to wins this season, especially on the back of a lot of dysfunction on this team and a lot of other places. The defense needing to find its footing through a lot of this year. The offense and the play calling of the offense never really quite finding its footing. The run game never really consistently being there is something that the offense can lean upon. So it really coming down time and time again to Geno's arm and whether or not he can throw your way to getting a win, especially with some of those fourth quarter comebacks, which again this year he stacked many of them up, as he has every year that he started for you at quarterback, as being clutch, just another thing that he brings in his back pocket. My runner-up, my honorable mention would be Leonard Williams, the guy who would be my vote for Defensive Player of the Year, the guy that put this defense on his back at times and helped carry you to victory in games where you were very close, in games where you needed his separator in performance to get that done. In that New York Jets game, which he took over, if he doesn't have that interception return for a touchdown, if he's not able to get as much done in the run game as he did in that game, maybe the Jets are able to score a little bit more. Maybe that's a game that they sneak away from your Seattle Seahawks. You had a couple games this year that could have been that way. Cardinal game as well, 16-6. picks. Yeah, you got the touchdown return, but the offense wasn't doing much on that day. You needed Leonard Williams' dominant performance to go get that win. It's not merely that he filled things up statistically on the season, it's that his impact helped lead you to get actual wins. Those are my award winners. Please let me know what you think. Did someone win unjustly? Did I leave someone out? Please comment below. My name is Brandon Kane. This is the Hawks Nest. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. But beyond all that, don't you ever forget, go Hawks.